So how hard is it to replace a rusted out suspension pan in a Porsche 911?
Garage time.
So I now know the answer to that question. Yes, you can do this at home in a two-car garage without a lift, without any of the factory tools or alignment fixtures or anything like that. I still have a little more work to do on the gas tank panel. I'm going to be installing that today and finishing up some of the welds, tidying things up and making it look as best I can. So please stay tuned to the end. I'm going to summarize this project because I know it's a popular project on a 911. I will talk about the tools needed, the skill level, the difficulty, the welding. I will talk about all that at the end once I get it finished. So please stay tuned. Okay, last week's video I left off with the sandblaster and it wasn't really working that well for me. So today I'm going to use a different method known as electrolysis. So check it out. Okay, I'm just outside my garage here. This is the part and it's submersed into this solution and it's been working for a little while. Basically what this is a tub of liquid and it has this solution inside. It's sodium bicarbonate by Arm & Hammer super washing soda. A little different than baking soda. It's sodium carbonate, not bicarbonate. It's just sodium carbonate. And I have it connected. There is an anode right here on this side. That's a small anode. It's just a steel plate. And then it's connected to an anode on this side as well. This is just another steel plate. And those two are wired together. So back behind this bucket is a wire. Those two are wired together. And then the negative terminal is the cathode. And that is the actual part. So there is a wire coming from a 12-volt battery connecting right to the part. So the electricity is really powering the rust off of this thing. And you can kind of see it sort of bubbling and working down there. So this solution becomes an electrolyte and it just basically, it's a gentle process. It only takes off the rust. It does not take off any of the steel. And it's just an accelerated chemical reaction. And I'm leaving it in here for about an hour, 2 hours. I think most of this scum on top of here is after about an hour. I'll pull it out in a few minutes. Electrolysis. You need a bucket with a anode. Steel, so this is a steel anode. And then these are connected with a wire to a battery. Plus, minus. The anode goes to the plus. These are connected. So these are the steel plates, left and right. And then the negative goes to the part. So here is the part. You have, this kind of dog bone shaped thing. Connect that to here. Fill this with, I used warm water. Warm H2O plus 1 cup of washing soda. I measured the current that flows in based on the size of the plates that I had and the size of the part was, current was 5 amps. So you could use a 2 amp power supply or 2 amp charger on trickle mode because this was a battery and it has a lot of amps available. This process with this much of the washing solution pulled 5 amps, which is pretty aggressive. You could get by with less, but it just might take longer. So there you go. If you're curious about the details on that, this is the simple way to do it. There's more information on this on YouTube. So while that gas tank panel is getting derusted, I am going to focus on this area right here. This is the gas tank. This is the gas tank ledge. And as I mentioned in a previous video, it was not formed the same way as the original part. The original part is a much more square profile, and this one is, you know, much more round. So I'm going to build a little buck and just use a jack and just square it off a little bit so that I have something to weld the gas tank support to. The issue I have with this one is it being round, it's really difficult to weld when there's daylight between there. Okay, I'm just digging through my pile of scrap and I'm looking for something that can go in here so I can hammer it flat. This is really close, just a little bit too narrow. This guy here is just a little too wide. Okay, I found this piece plus this little piece of stainless steel. I have my welder out anyways, so rather than grind off this big piece, I'm just going to weld these two pieces together and call it done. Okay, I just dipped this outside in that big bucket of water. So I'm gonna round the corners a little bit so I don't mark the metal, and then use this to square that out. Okay, now I have this little tower welded onto a flat plate so I can support the bottom with a jack and then hammer on top. Before I start pounding on this, there's a real quick inside view of how this works. Okay, I think you can see the difference. This is the section I just flattened out, and it's got some sharper corners, which is cool. First pass here, I'm going to go through with some hand dollies in a minute, but here you can see where it starts. This is the area I haven't touched. This is the rounded section that came from Restoration Design. Took me about 10 minutes. All right, hopefully this is visible on camera, but this is a much flatter profile on top, so I can spot weld to that reverse channel, and things should be really good. Now it's time to check on the rust bath. Okay, this is looking very soupy and rusty, so I'm gonna unplug it so I don't electrocute anything. Okay, all that black stuff is where the rust was. Now, it's going to leave a black residue. That's totally normal. So what happens now is I just take it inside, wire brush it, and it should come pretty clean. Let's check it out inside. Okay, here's a close-up of that rusted area, and you can see those, it's pitted, but it's perfectly clean, just as if it was sandblasted. So the wire brush alone wouldn't have gotten it this clean, because I tried in the past. I wire brushed it, couldn't get it totally clean. After the electrolysis, wire brushing makes it look like this, and doesn't lose any metal, and it's completely non-toxic. Okay, here's another important thing. This nut right here is a captive nut, and so it's sandwiched. There's a possibility that there is some liquid or electrolyte still trapped beneath here. So what I'm going to do is just heat it up really well past the boiling point, so it evaporates all that liquid out of there. So I can prep it for. I'll just paint. I'll primer right over that once it's cleaned. So I finally have this part repaired and I have it cleaned, so I can now paint the underside with some, I'm just going to use some primer and some Rust-Oleum enamel, which is good enough on the inside, and then I'm going to put some cavity wax on top of that just for some extra protection. So this is, all the flanges have been fixed and it's ready to go. So I'm excited to put it in. I also derusted this small bracket. This piece is goes on top of the battery support, and I'm not sure I need it in my car. I mean, the battery technology has changed so much that the batteries that came in this car in 1974 were enormous, and this bracket, I think, supports a much bigger battery. I think using this hole right here. So I'll show you how it fits in the car, but most likely I'm just gonna store this away somewhere in a box. This is the location of where that bracket goes. It's not in its perfect position, but to me this is just another empty cavity that could potentially rust again in the future, and I might even relocate the battery into this smuggler's box. So the gas tank fits in no problem. Sitting down on that mount. Looks like to be pretty level across the back, and it's sitting down on that mount. So let me check the bottom. Okay, I'm under the car again, and I'm looking at the gas tank. And as you can see, this thing is mangled. This was either picked up with a forklift right here, or when it ran off the road, it took out the gas tank. So this is going to either need to be replaced, or I might actually fix this one because I'm going to be doing some modifications to the fuel tank anyways for the gas tank filler. So we'll see what happens, but I don't think the suspension pan is the problem. So as it relates to the fit, I think this is okay. So the suspension pan is in the right place. It all seems to go in the hole. It's just the gas tank here is the problem. There is a little bit of porosity right here. You can see those little holes right there. So I'm going to grind that off and probably have to hit it with the TIG welder. But it's in there, and this edge here seemed to line up pretty well. Here's the bottom side. These reliefs here look like they line up pretty well. And the nice thing about having a wide gap to start with, it was a pretty wide gap, the MIG welder penetrates all the way through. So this is a very sound structural weld. I am going to finish it on both sides, but I'm not worried about the strength here. All right, you won't see me use one of these flap disc things on sheet metal very often, but because this is, you know, kind of suspension, rougher work, it works okay. It just creates a lot of heat into the panel, and I don't want to distort it, but because of the, you know, this is a real small area, it should be fine. If you notice, you know, with MIG welding, you're almost always going to get these pinholes. I don't know if you can see light shining through, but there are a couple pinholes and a couple cracks starting to develop because the way I hit it with the hammer. So I'm going to go back over this with a TIG welder and just, you know, fill up these holes. Okay, but before I break out a different welder, I'm going to do the same weld on the other side. This is the driver's side. All right, it looks like this is sitting nice and flat all the way along, just like the other side. So ready to move on to prepping all this area for some paint. I got one more rosette weld to do here. Okay, this piece has been painted, and I removed the masking tape and added the weld-through primer onto these edges right here. So the flatter paint is the weld-through primer, and then the glossier paint is just the Rust-Oleum. So this is ready to install. Okay, I've done some real quick masking and cleaning here. I've also roughed up this surface a little bit so the paint can adhere to it. I'm going to put down some primer with some Rust-Oleum on top, a little cavity wax in here too. I'll show you that in a minute. But the tape is here so that I have weld-through primer in the areas that are going to see the welding. This is what I get for talking poorly about these angle grinders. The switch is totally broken. All right, the masking tape has been removed and the like 90 has been applied. So I just feathered the sort of like 90, let it overspray a little bit. But the like 90 is in the strategic place where the welds are going to be. I don't put it on too thick, but you can see this is ready to go. I'm going to spray a little bit of this cavity wax. Let me show you what that looks like. This is the first time using this brand. I've used 3M cavity wax in the past, but this is easy to get on Amazon, so I got this instead. It's probably the same stuff, but this is a kind of cosmoline waxy oil sort of substance, and it works really well on new parts, like parts like I just painted. This will wick its way into the seams. It comes with a sprayer like this, and then it also comes with a wand with a special nozzle on the end. So you can actually put this inside holes and eject it or inject it into all sorts of little spaces. So this is probably overkill. So these cars sort of live a charmed life these days, but I want to take every precaution I can to ensure there won't be rust again. All right, I've put some of the cavity wax in here too, and I really tried to get it into these seams and into this sort of hollow area. I think I mentioned this before, but what I was doing there with the Dremel tool, I have a carbide burr on the end of it, and I'm just scratching out the weld-through primer. So I know that I'm getting penetration into the metal below as I weld up these holes and plug weld it in. All right, here's a little status update. I've got some welds on both sides. That's the passenger side. I have these welds over here for the driver's side. And then I have this strap rigged up. It's actually going to the back tire or back axle. And what I'm trying to do is this is the area that I flattened out, which is I'm glad I did. But I'd like to get this edge a little closer to the middle. And so I just welded up this little loop. And I have this here on the gas tank bolt, and I'm just pulling it just a little bit. I don't want to bend or break anything, but I do want to just shift that over a little bit. I recommend using primer when grinding the welds so you can tell where the weld is versus where the non-disturbed metal is. Hey guys, it's in, and I'm exhausted. Let me show you how it looks. All right, if you're wondering how I simulated those spot welds on that gas tank panel, please check for another video next week, midweek. I'll try to release a short video on just that alone. This is getting to be a long video, but it's a pretty simple technique. Not that important for this car, but I want to show you the technique because it is just a little bit more incognito. Undetectable repairs are always better. Not that I'm trying to hide anything here on YouTube, but it does look better. Okay, in summary, replacing a suspension pan is doable by an average Joe like me. But you have to do it carefully, and it can be done. So yes, there's some tools required, and it really kind of comes down into 3 major steps. So the first step is disassembly and removing the old pan. So I give that one a level of difficulty of probably 4 out of 10. It's not hard to use a spot drill, it's not hard to use a chisel and a hammer, but it feels like a 11 out of 10 because it's tedious, it's time consuming, it's difficult work. So I want to preface that by saying it is easy, but it takes a lot of time and it's tough. You will be sore the next day, guaranteed. you know, if I was getting paid by some shops do by the hour, I would be using air hammers and all sorts of shortcuts to get the old suspension pen out. The nice thing about doing it yourself is you can take your time, work on it over a couple days, and do the best job you possibly can. I didn't rip and tear much of the metal getting that old suspension pan out, but because I took my time to do it. Step 2 is fitting the new pan, getting it trimmed to fit, aligning the suspension points. So I spent a lot of time on how to align the suspension points, make sure it's correct. So I've said this in a previous video, the factory recommended way to replace a suspension pan is to use the Celette jig. Yes, that is a huge benefit to have a Celette jig, but most people like me aren't going to have one laying around in their garage. So the next best thing, in my opinion, is to use the tram gauge, which I'll put a link down below, and I've talked about it in previous videos. Tram gauges are very accurate if you set them up correctly. Factory information is in the manuals. You set the distances, make sure the tram is actually kind of parallel to what the factory dimensions are, or parallel to the floor, and go from there, and you will be very, very close, within a millimeter. So I'll show you guys what a millimeter difference looks like, and it's very obvious. The way the cones and the holes work, a 1 millimeter difference is very achievable if you have a tram gauge. The other thing that's important is leveling the car. The Celette bench is very stiff, rigid structure. It's level. The garage floor is not level, but you can take measurements based on the garage floor if you use the water method, spirit level that I described. So I've had questions before, why not just use a laser level or all those other levels? Well, yes, you can, but in my opinion, nothing is more simple and more accurate than water. Water is always going to be level, and it's easy to reference the water level exactly where you need it, which is just below the suspension points. So I highly recommend that method. It's not, I didn't invent it, but I think it's not commonly used, and most people are putting suspension pans in and they're probably not putting them in straight. So I highly recommend going through that work. Now, if you have a car that you think it's had the suspension pan replaced and you think something might be wrong, either it's difficult to align or difficult to corner balance, difficult to track straight, you can use the tram gauge on a car. Just put it up on a lift or jack it up and put the sockets over the bolts and see if it's square. You can use the same leveling technique to see if your car has a twist in it. So the techniques I showed are universal for any car, and I hope that there's value in that for you guys. So I'm going to give level of difficulty on the alignment and panel fit. I'm going to give that a 7 out of 10 because it does require some custom tools, a little bit of know-how, a little bit of thought on how to set up the tools. There's some custom tools, like I made the height gauges that are adjustable. I think it's fair to go 7 out of 10 on that one. The last phase of the suspension pan is the welding and making sure things don't distort during the welding. So I'm going to give that one, again, a 7 out of 10. Just for reference, you guys, a 10 out of 10 for me is replacing the rear flares. I think, because it's a cosmetic part and it's outer body, for me, that's a 10 out of 10. Suspension work doesn't have to be as accurate. I'm giving it a 7 out of 10 for difficulty, but it feels like it's harder than that because you're climbing around inside the gas tank area. The access is difficult. You're upside down a lot of times. So it feels like a lot more work than a 7 out of 10. But at the end of the day, it's rosette welds, it's grinding and making it look pretty. So using the methods I talked about in step 2 to make sure it stays aligned is really important. I had a tough time because my car had been wrecked before. So getting the metal to not only be aligned in the suspension points, but getting it lined up for the hood required more work on my part. So that was to be expected. I don't have a lot of previous pictures of my car after I fixed the accident damage, but I am going to show you a picture of the suspension arm, the A-arm on the front side that was wrecked. Most of the hit was taken onto the wheel. So it did move the suspension points, and that's all been corrected now. I just don't have a video or the pictures to show you guys, unfortunately. If I had it, I would absolutely share it. I just don't have it. So I hope that's helpful for you guys, whether you're going to do this job yourself or pay someone to do it. I hope that you've learned some of the steps that are involved, And if someone's offering to do this for 600 bucks, then I would say, great, but start asking questions. How do you know if it's lined up well? How do you know that it's not going to rust again? How do you know that all the parts are in there? There's those little brackets on the inside. Make sure that people aren't cutting corners, and be knowledgeable about this repair. It's a very common repair, and unfortunately, I think a lot of times it goes poorly. But you may not ever know, because the disadvantage of a shop doing this is, they're interested in time. They're trying to get it out as quickly as possible, the same way Porsche did. I showed some welds on the factory Porsche welds from this car that were below my standards, but Porsche had to get cars out. They didn't have time to fix stuff on the line. It was good enough and it worked well. My standards are a little higher, so because it's my own car and I have the time to fix things, I'm taking the extra step to satisfy myself. And you guys probably think I'm crazy, especially for simulating spot welds, and you're right, I don't need to do that for this car. This is not a show car. But I wanted to show you anyways, because this is a type of work that can be done.